Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. So good morning again. We're going to continue where we left off. We started last week. We were looking at paragraph 4, which had all the property. We looked at 4A. We started into 4B. So it's the addendas and the advisories, then other addenda that are attached. So we're going to continue there. And we're going to talk about a couple of the other ones that may be included. If you have a question, please, raise your hand or type it in the chat, and I will get to you as soon as I can. Other than that, let's go ahead and share the screen and get started. Now, what you guys should be seeing is paragraph 4, right? So we did 4A. We talked about those addendums, that the purchase addendums that are going to be on there. B, we started with the backup offer addendum, and with the blank addendum, we talked about that last week. So let's just start the next most common one that you're going to use, which would be, well, not common, but most likely. Let's look at the short sale addendum and how that affects the contract. So this is a short sale addendum. So whenever I'm writing an offer on a short sale, and we're starting to see that there are some more short sales that are coming up, you have to be prepared for it. And so what the short sale addendum does is it puts some terms on the purchase agreement because of the bank having to approve it. It gives some extra timelines and some things so that the buyer and the seller are not locked into this contract forever. So this is an addendum to the purchase agreement. If you're writing the offer and you know it's a short sale and you're going to include it, just go ahead and fill this out and send it. If not, if you're doing it as part of a counter offer and I'm countering you as listing agent to say this is a short sale and we have to include the short sale addendum, then I'm going to check off this box for counter offer because it's subject to the counter offer, not the purchase agreement. The date of the purchase agreement or counter offer goes here. Okay. The address of the property, the buyers, the sellers. Okay, so now it has paragraph 1 is a short sale explanation. What is a short sale? A short sale is the name used to describe a real estate transaction where the seller's lender agrees to allow the property owner to sell the property for less than the amount of the loan secured by the property. The consent of a seller's lender is necessary because without it, there would not be enough money from the sale of the property to pay off the lenders in full and to pay other costs of the sale. As a result, the lender's liens would remain on title and seller would be unable to transfer title to a buyer free of monetary liens. Properties worth less than the amount owed to a secured lender are often referred to as being underwater or distressed properties. So it's just an explanation to people what a short sale is. Buyer consideration. Short sales are often difficult transactions taking considerably longer than a typical real estate transaction to complete. There is no guarantee that the lender or lenders will agree to the terms of the purchase offer or that they will respond in any timely fashion or even respond at all. There is no obligation of a seller or a buyer to agree to any terms proposed by the lender as a condition of releasing the lien or debt on the property. Buyer may expend money on inspections, loan applications, escrow fees, and other costs that they will not be able to recover from anyone if the lender does not approve the transaction. Buyers may also have difficulty obtaining the return of their deposit in escrow if a seller becomes non-communicative during the short sale process. Generally, sellers also have the right to continue to give offers to their lenders even if they have a contract with an existing buyer. Brokers cannot give any assurances as to what will happen. Buyers strongly caution that any undisclosed or unapproved payment to junior lien holders or to seller or outside third-party negotiators may be a form of lender fraud. Buyers also strongly caution that writing offers on more than one short sale property with the intent to purchase only one such property could be misrepresentation, giving rise to legal claims by a seller, including a claim for the buyer's deposit. So, explanation of what a short sale is, and then a little bit of a warning to a buyer. And it's true. And I think what happens is the reason that CER does stuff like this, where they put in buyer's considerations in there, is because they can't rely on us as agents to have that conversation with the buyer and say, hey, listen, we do this short sale. right? We get the offer accepted on the short sale. You're going to pay for a home inspection. You're going to pay for an appraisal. If the bank doesn't approve that short sale, that money's gone. You can't request it from the seller. Nobody else is going to pay you. So you have to understand that that's just a cost of doing business. I mean, as a whole, we should be having conversations with our buyers where we're telling them that, hey, you're going to pay for a home inspection and you're going to pay for an appraisal. And there's a good chance that this escrow may not close. That money is gone. Like, you don't get a refund on that money. We can request it, but there's no guarantees that you're going to get it. So you have to be ready to spend that money. And especially on a short sale, you can't even request it because the seller has no money. The bank is paying for everything. The other thing is that, yeah, it could be difficult to get your deposit back. It's one of the things that we don't have to deal with much now. I mean, it was a problem when short sales were like the only sales that were happening. But if a seller wants to sell because they're losing the house, they're in notice of default, they're underwater, like this says, and their only way out is either foreclosure or doing the short sale and getting approved. If the bank doesn't approve it and they have nowhere to go, and the next stop for them is really just going through the whole foreclosure process and losing the house, they don't have a hell of a lot of motivation for moving out, for responding to people, to signing documents that need to be signed. So there could be some significant delays for a buyer if the escrow cancels to get their deposit back. Okay, so you have to understand that. Now, this on the short sale approval, paragraph 2, is where we're going to do the terms of getting the short sale approval. So 2A is, this agreement is contingent upon seller's receipt of and delivery to buyer of a seller approved written consent to the agreement from all existing secured lenders and lien holders by no later than 5 p.m. 45 days after acceptance. That's the default. So by default, they have 45 days to negotiate the short sale and get the approval. If on day 45, the seller hasn't received the approval, the seller could cancel the escrow. If day 45, the seller hasn't received this and delivered it to the buyer can send cancellation instructions. Okay. If buyer or seller cancels the agreement prior to the short sale contingency date, that party may be in breach of the agreement unless the cancellation is made pursuant to some other paragraph in this addendum or in this agreement, whether or not time periods in the agreement have commenced. So here's the thing. You can't cancel prior to, because we're agreeing that we have that 45-day period. So as buyer, technically you can't cancel before unless there is some other contingency in place or something else in place that allows you to do it prior to the day 45. Okay. So just, you have to be aware of that. You're in this for that period of time. So when I see sometimes where people are doing the short sale addendum and they're extending that 45 days, remember that both of your clients are locked in for that period of time. Okay. Short sale lenders' consent means that all short sale lenders shall collectively agree to reduce their prospective loan balance by an amount sufficient to permit the proceeds from the sale of the property to pay the existing balances on loans secured by the property. Real property taxes, broker compensation, closing costs, and other monetary obligations the agreement requires seller to pay at close of escrow, including but not limited to escrow charges, title charges, documentary transfer taxes, prorations, retrofits, homeowner association fees and repairs, without requiring seller to place any funds into escrow or have any continuing obligation to short sale lenders approved by seller prior to delivery to buyer. So that's what they're saying. They're just saying, look, what this sales price, all the lenders, all the lien holders that are on the property all agree that we're cool to take less than what we're owed and pay all these fees, and we'll wipe everything out. That's what the approval means. Okay. Seller shall deliver buyer a copy of short sale lender's consent or term sheet within 3 days after receipt and approval by seller. Seller presentation to buyer of short sale lender's consent satisfying 2B removes the contingency in paragraph 2A. Okay, so that's gone. If by the short sale contingency date, seller has not received short sale lender's consent satisfying paragraph 2B, seller may in writing cancel the agreement. Or buyer has not received a copy of short sale lender's consent satisfying paragraph 2B, buyer may cancel the agreement in writing. In either case, Buyer shall be entitled to return of any remaining deposit delivered to escrow. Seller shall reasonably cooperate with existing short sale lenders in the short sale loan process, but neither seller nor buyer is obligated to change the terms of their agreement to satisfy short sale lenders' consent or term sheet. So that means that we come up with an agreement, okay? And we say, this is the sales price we're going to do. This is all, whatever the commissions are, everything, we come to an agreement. The short sale lender comes back and says, we need to make these changes in order to approve it. If buyer and seller want to complete the deal, then they know what they have to do. But if they don't want to change, there's nothing that forces them to change the terms of their agreement that they agreed to when they submitted for the approval, just based on what the lender wants for the approval. You're not required to make the change. If you want to continue with that transaction, then you would have to, but there is no requirement. You guys could both walk away from it. Okay. If short sale lender's written consent or term sheet provided to seller require changes to the agreement in order to satisfy the terms of 2B, neither buyer nor seller shall be obligated to continue negotiations to satisfy any of the requirements of the term sheet. Either party may in writing cancel the agreement, and seller is advised to seek legal, accounting, and tax advice before agreeing to any such changes. Both parties must agree in writing to the changes to the written consent or term sheet before continuing under the terms of the agreement. If the agreement is canceled pursuant to this paragraph, buyer shall be entitled to return of any remaining deposit delivered to escrow. So again, we have the right to cancel. If they change the terms of our agreement, either party can cancel based on the change in the terms. You don't have to agree to it. Time periods. Now, this is when we look at like other contingencies where it affects like the COP, the sale of buyer's property, right, to purchase the upleg, or the SPRP where the seller has to, it's contingent on the seller finding replacement property. In those, most of the time, I have you check the box that says it shall begin as specified in the agreement. In this case, I'm going to say no. Now, that doesn't mean that a listing agent isn't going to counter you to do it, and then that becomes a conversation. But by default in the short sale addendum, the time periods for the contingencies for investigations, inspections, appraisals, loan, all that stuff, the seller to deliver you documents as far as disclosures and reports and things of that nature, they don't start until you receive the approval from the short sale lender, the consent, not the amended consent where they're saying, no, you have to change the terms of the agreement to this. When you get full consent that says the lender has approved this short sale, the next day the clock starts ticking, which means that's when my contingencies start, and that's when my deposit goes into escrow. And the reason I like leaving it like that, and I would never do it any other way, writing an offer, I would only change it if I got a counter offer from the seller and that was the only terms they would accept. But on paragraph 3 and 4, I would not check these boxes. And I would say that our time periods and our deposit and everything will go into escrow when the bank approves it. Because like I said earlier, now you have a short sale seller who has no motivation to be communicative any longer, right? To respond to emails or texts or to sign documents because they were not approved. That's where the delay comes in releasing the deposit. If there's no deposit in there and the seller doesn't communicate or doesn't want to sign cancellation instructions, at least there's no money being held up for your buyer. Excuse me. So I would leave it that way. And again, if a listing agent counters you and says, no, you have to put your deposit in right away and the time periods are all going to start, so you got to spend money on appraisal and spend money on an inspection, then that's a conversation you have with your buyer. And you explain to your buyer what that means, what the hazards are in doing that, and that those costs may never be recouped and it'd be hard to get the deposit back. And if they say, yes, we want to do that, then great. Then you're going to follow it up with an email or something in writing that says, I advised you that we shouldn't, or that, that you've made a choice that that's what you want to do. And then that way, at least there's some record that you had the conversation with them. Okay. Paragraph 5, no assurance of lender approval. That's the thing too, is when you guys do this, there is no guarantee that the lender is going to approve any of these short sales, right? I mean, for a while they were pretty routinely approving short sales. Not the case anymore. As a matter of fact, we had a case in the office where they were negotiating a short sale and the bank didn't even communicate with them. And it says right there that they may not respond. The bank didn't even communicate and they sold the house at auction while the agents were negotiating the short sale. So you never know. There is no guarantee when it comes to a short sale. So please make sure that everybody is aware of that. And that's what I think becomes difficult, especially right now when there's not a lot of short sales, that for buyers, they don't kind of wrap their head around the whole idea of how it works. The buyer and seller costs, the seller's costs are going to get covered by the short sale lenders. The buyer's costs are the buyer's costs. They're going to have to pay it. And if they lose out on something, if it doesn't get approved and they've paid for inspections and appraisals, that money is just spent. Okay. You have to make sure they're aware of that. Other offers, unless otherwise agreed in writing, after buyer's offer has been accepted by seller has the right to continue to market the property for backup offers. Seller has the right to accept backup offers and, subject to short sale lenders requirement, present to short sale lenders any accepted backup offers that are received. And seller shall notify buyer when any accepted backup offers are presented to short sale lender. So most, I don't think it's all, still require you lenders when you're negotiating the short sale to look for other offers just in case you get something that's better than what you're negotiating. So you do have to understand as buyer, when you get your offer accepted on a short sale, the seller and the listing agent are going to continue to have the property on the market, not as active under contract. And if they get a backup offer, they are going to accept that backup offer using the backup offer addendum that we talked about last week. And they're going to submit those back to the lender. And who knows what effect that's going to have on the short sale that you're already negotiating. So keep that in mind. Okay. The credit, legal, and tax advice. Sellers informed that a short sale may have credit or legal consequences that may result in taxable income to seller. Seller is advised to seek advice from qualified California real estate and tax attorney, certified public accountant, or other expert regarding the potential consequences of a short sale. And you gotta kind of drive that point home with the seller, because not always is there going to be a tax consequence, but there could for forgiven debt. So you have to keep that in mind. But we're not tax advisors. So you got to talk to them and say, okay, you need to go talk to a CPA, and this is what's, let them know what you're doing, and they can let you know if there's going to be any tax consequences or, financial issues for you. So that's that for the short sale addendum. Needs to be incorporated in every short sale transaction. Please just make sure that if you're doing that, this is incorporated, because again, it helps with if there's any delays, any issues. Go ahead, Jesus.
When the short sale is being negotiated and the negotiation is agreed by the bank, the seller, and the buyer, and the negotiator and the buyer needs to request of the bank at the end for a letter explaining, I forgot the name of it, but where it's actually stipulates that the seller is not longer abide to pay taxes after that. So there's a letter for that. They need to get it. Otherwise, if they don't get it, they might have to pay taxes.
Well, for most short sales, well, I'm not saying most short sales. For anybody who is doing a short sale on original purchase money, right? So I bought this house 2 years ago. The loan that's on there is my original purchase money loan. Generally, there are zero tax consequences to that. You still will get a 1099 for the forgiven debt, but because it's your principal residence, it's purchase money, no taxes. The people who are at have an issue that may have to pay taxes or will have some kind of tax consequences, and it's important that they talk to a CPA, regardless of what that letter is from the bank, is anybody who's refinanced, anybody who's done like a home equity, and that's part of the short sale, or if it is not your principal residence, it is an investment property that you're short selling, then you're going to get a 1099 for the forgiven debt, and there will be some consequences, but you again talk to a CPA about what those things will be.
Thank you.
Mhm. So again, it's important that these are the discussions you have with a seller when you do the short sale. Is that, and that's the thing, is we have to be really careful, because you start to do the short sale, you think that, well, yeah, they'll approve it, we'll negotiate it, we'll get it done. And things like what happened to our agents here, where they were negotiating and it still got foreclosed upon, sent to auction. So you never know. Okay, so you have to be careful. Any other questions about the short sale addendum? Okay. So next up, we're going to look up at the septic well inspection, property monument, and propane tank allocation of cost addendum. They changed the name of that when they revised it last year. So if your property has a septic tank, you're going to want to incorporate this, because you want to at least ask for some inspections and some things on septic tanks. The problem is that sometimes sellers don't know they have a septic tank and they don't disclose it to you. Okay. But when you do know, this is what we want to submit, right? So the following terms and conditions are hereby incorporated to be part of the purchase agreement. If I'm the buyer's agent, I'm sending this if I know that it has a septic tank. Okay. Septic inspection allocation of cost. So I would request that the seller pay for the inspection. Seller shall pay, or where it says buyer or seller shall pay for septic system to be inspected and a report prepared by a qualified septic professional. The location accessing, I would ask for the seller to pay for that. Now, the pumping, I'm not necessarily sure that's not always going to be necessary for there to be pumping, but you could check that if it is, that the seller could do that. Okay. And then the certification. Buyer or seller shall pay for certification by qualified septic professional or by the city of, county of, wherever the property is. No, not all cities or counties require certification. Those cities and counties that do require certification may not have the same requirements as others. Some may require only a filing of required forms or reports, or require nothing at all. Okay. One of the things too that you want to have somebody inspect it for is to make sure that it's the proper size for the property, that it has an accessible location for pumping. There's some things that happen with septic tanks, and it's just because they weren't done properly, and then we don't have inspections done, and we find out later. Look, we had a lawsuit here because one of our agents sold a property to a buyer. The sellers didn't disclose that it had a septic tank. There was no septic inspection done. There was none of that stuff was finished. After it was done, was completed, after it closed, there was an issue with the septic tank. They found out that the septic tank that was in there was not the right size for the property. And the way the property was situated, there was no way for them to put a larger or additional septic tank in. So the buyers now owned a house that had an underperforming septic system. And how are you going to live like that? Right. So you have to be really careful about that. Okay. Excavation, buyer, seller shall pay for the excavation. That's if you're going to remove it. If checked, alternate septic systems, the property has an alternative septic system. Seller shall provide the buyer, if available, to seller the following information: the name of the servicer, how often service is required, and the annual cost of the servicing. Anything else that you're going to ask for. So you're really probably going to use this for the septic, because the other section is for well water. And I don't know that we're dealing a lot with transactions where we're selling properties that have a well. But if they did, this is where we would go through with who's going to provide the reports, the productivity, the testing, all that stuff, to make sure that the well is safe. Okay. Okay. But the septic, I need you guys to be familiar with that form and submit it. Next up, we're going to look at, oh no, let's just start with the seller's intent to exchange. So when you're doing an exchange, right, when I'm selling a property that's going to be part of a 1031 exchange, it is not the norm for us to use the SPRP, the seller's purchase of replacement property, because that's not what's happening. Instead, there's this form, which is the seller's intent to exchange addendum. The seller's intent to exchange addendum is just kind of give the terms of to the buyer that, hey, letting them know that, hey, this is basically contingent on us finding a replacement or an exchange property to satisfy the 1031 exchange criteria. Okay. If you already have, well, let's do it this way. Paragraph 1, seller intent to exchange. It is the intent of the seller to utilize this transaction as part of an exchange of like kind property under Internal Revenue Code 1031 and the regulations promulgated thereunder. The other property to the exchange is described as, that's if you already have identified another property that you're trying to purchase, or to be located and designated by seller who shall take all steps necessary to enter into a contract to acquire such other property. So most of the time you're going to be checking this box. Unless you've already identified a property, then you could do that one. Cooperation. Buyer agrees to cooperate in effecting seller's exchanges specified below. Buyer in this transaction shall not be required to take title to other property for any period of time as an accommodation to seller unless agreed in writing. Buyer agrees at no cost to buyer to take such actions and execute or consent to such additional documents and transactions as may be reasonably requested by seller, provided that all the conditions of this agreement are met. The thing is that what happens is, because when we're doing exchange, there's an accommodator involved, there's a third party, and they may have some other documents. That's what they're saying, is that the buyer's going to cooperate with those from the 1031 exchange company, the accommodator. Failure of exchange. Now, this is what happens if we can't find an exchange. If seller is unable, through no fault of seller, to locate, designate, enter into a contract to acquire or complete acquisition of such other property by the close of escrow in the agreement or as extended by mutual agreement. Now, that means at no fault of the seller. That means that the seller's writing offers. They're attempting to make offers on properties and they're not getting their offer accepted. If they're not even writing offers and they're like, never mind, we can't exchange it, that's not at no fault of the seller. So you have to understand that too when you're having a conversation with your seller about the exchanges. Like, you have to be active in trying to find something, which means we have to offer on things. We have to do, we have to make some attempts. If you're not even trying, if you're just like, nah, that doesn't work, I don't like that one, I don't like this one, you got to try, okay? But here are your options if you can't exchange. And by default, the option is this transaction shall close without extension of time for closing. So they're just saying, if I can't find something to exchange into, I'm agreeing to just go ahead and sell it to you anyway. Okay? And that's if I can't find something for the exchange during the escrow period. Remember that a seller has 45 days after close of escrow to identify the properties that they want to purchase, and then 6 months basically, or 180 days, which isn't quite 6 months, but 180 days to close on one of those identified properties after the close of escrow. So there is a mechanism in place where a seller could say, you know what, I'm going to take my chance. Let's go ahead and close it, and then I'm going to try to find a replacement property. Okay. The danger to the seller in that is, though, if the seller doesn't find a replacement property, they don't identify something in that 45-day period, and they don't, and they're not unable to get an offer accepted on one of those during that 45-day period, and we can't open escrow, then their money has to stay with the accommodator for 6 months, and then they get taxed on that money. Okay. So that's what happens. So the next section, B, is the close of escrow for this transaction shall be extended by a maximum of, pick days, 30 days, 45 days, whatever it is, to allow you to complete the arrangements. Okay. So we could build in an extension from the beginning. Or C, this transaction shall be canceled. Buyer's deposit shall be returned to buyer, and all parties shall be released from any further obligation to each other. So you could set it up that way, similar to a contingency of finding a replacement property. We're going to extend the escrow, or we're going to cancel the escrow, or we're going to close it. It doesn't matter, but you choose here as the seller. Seller shall indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the other party to this transaction and agents from all liabilities and any additional attorney fees, accountant fees, or any other costs arising from or connected in any way with the exchange, right? So whatever fees they incur from doing the exchange are theirs. Any additional terms that you want to put in, the taxes and the legal consequences of an exchange. And it just says, it basically breaks down what I just told you, the 45 days, 180 days, and what happens with their money that the accommodator has. The parties agree that no real estate broker agent involved in this transaction has given either party tax or legal advice regarding whether the property and other property qualify for an exchange. The parties are advised to seek advice of a qualified California real estate attorney or certified public accountant regarding the ability and legal requirements to complete the exchange. Everybody signs. So anytime that you have a seller that is doing an exchange, this document needs to be incorporated into your transaction. And vice versa, I thought I had a buyer's intent to exchange in there. Buyer counter. I swear I thought I had one. There it is. Buyer's intent to exchange has been added. And here's the flip side. So now that I have sold my property, okay, I am now writing offers trying to get the exchange property. That is this. Now I am the buyer. This is the form that I will include with my offers. Buyer's intent to exchange. It is the intent of the buyer to utilize this transaction as part of an exchange of like-kind property under Revenue Code 1031 and the regulations promulgated thereunder. The other property to the exchange is described as it is the property that you have sold already, the one they own already. That's what the other property is. So if this was, we were selling, I don't know this property, right? This address, then it would be this address would be here. Okay. Cooperation. Seller agrees to cooperate in effecting buyer's exchange as specified below. Seller's transaction shall not be required to take title to other property for any period of time as an accommodation to buyer unless agreed in writing. Seller agrees at no cost to seller to take such actions and execute or consent to such additional documents and transactions as may be reasonably requested by buyer, provided that all of the conditions of the agreement are met, right? Just like what the seller's intent to exchange said. Now we have the failure of exchange. If buyer is unable through no fault of buyer to complete the transfer of such other property by the close of escrow in this agreement or as extended by mutual agreement, this transaction shall close escrow as a sale without extension of time of closing, right? So I couldn't sell mine, but I still want to buy this one, so I'll make it work and we buy it. That's what it is. The close of escrow for this transaction can be extended. If I can't meet the timelines of this escrow, I can extend it, or it'll be canceled and my deposit will be returned to me. Same terms as the seller's intent. The indemnity is the same. The tax and legal consequences are the same. The scope of broker duty is the same. The only thing that changes is this is for the buyer who's purchasing something and not the seller who's selling something. Okay. But these are two forms that don't get used enough or at all. There's been many, many times where I've seen exchanges, those kind of purchases and sales go through and the intent to exchange forms were not incorporated in the transaction. So just keep in mind, if you are working with an exchange, that's where we want to go. Okay. Let's see what's next in our addendums. Okay. We did that. The buyer investigation advisory, the wire fraud, the housing, the Consumer Privacy Act. We're all familiar with those. Those have always been included with our purchase agreements. We've seen them a number of times. The statewide buyer and seller advisory, I'll click that off. We'll look at it. The probate advisory, let's put all these little advisories in right now so that they're all added and we could take a look at it. Okay. So let's start with the statewide buyer and seller, because there's really nothing to fill out in that one. So let me get that one here. Let's add that and take a look at it. So the statewide buyer and seller advisory technically should be, if you're incorporating it, should be incorporated with your offer, which means that if I'm sending an offer, I should also be sending this. I don't know how many pages it is now, 14 pages or whatever with my offer. I know that's a lot, but that's really the right way to do it, that this is supposed to go with it. Now, the statewide buyer and seller advisory is just that. It is an advisory. There's nothing to fill out, but really what it is it's a combination of the seller advisory and the buyer inspection advisory. So, when you take a listing, there's that seller advisory that talks about the disclosures and everything that they have to provide. Then there's the buyer's inspection advisory. It has most of, if not all of the inspections that the buyer has the right to do. This is a combination of the two, of all the investigations that a buyer can do, of all the disclosures that a seller has to provide. It's a lot of pages. I know I'm going through it quickly. We're not going to read through each one of them, but because it's just that. It is just an advisory, and it merges those two. So I don't know why CAR hasn't just made this part of the purchase agreement and part of the listing agreement, since it's both buyer and seller have to sign it, but they haven't. So this is, again, we're at now it's 15 pages of advisories. Again, nothing to fill out, just needs to be signed. But technically, it's supposed to be incorporated into the purchase agreement from the beginning, and we need to have it as part of the transaction to make sure that everybody that signed that advisory. Go ahead, Jesus.
You actually answered my question, because sometimes the agents send it with the RPA and sometimes they don't. I was wondering if it is required. I don't attach it.
It's not required if you don't check the box. If you didn't check the box, then it's not part of the purchase agreement. I mean, I don't know that everybody's requiring that form. Obviously, CAR doesn't make it as a required form, because otherwise the box would be checked like the other ones that are always required to be in there.
Correct.
We require it, right, as part of in our office. So not necessarily are other brokers going to make that a requirement. We do. So if you check the box in your purchase agreement, then yeah, you have to send it with the purchase agreement. If you haven't checked the box, you don't need to send it with your purchase agreement. You just need to make sure, if you're the buyer or listing agent in our office, that it gets signed and is part of your transaction. That's it. All right. So let's move on. And now I forgot where I was going to go next. So I have to make you guys dizzy again. Stay away. Oh, the probates, the trust, and the REO, they're very similar to each other. So that's what we like. We're going to put the probate advisory in there. And we're going to put the trust advisory. And they're all pretty similar. They're all pretty similar. So I think if we just look at one of them, we could see what. So REO advisory and the probate advisory and the trust advisory are very similar. What they are is it's a form that just it lets everybody know what is required and what is not required for those types of transactions. Remember that probates, trusts where the successor trustee is the seller, and REOs don't require a TDS. So because they don't require a TDS, these are the things that we list off so that they know what they're required to provide and what the buyer knows they're required to receive, right? So they're all pretty much identical. Seller must comply with the following. Known material fact disclosures. Seller is obligated to disclose known material facts affecting the value and desirability of the property. So just because I'm not the owner, right? So in this case, it's an REO. If I'm an REO agent, because the people that run the accounts for the REOs, they've never seen the property. The listing agent has. But if the listing agent knows that there's something that needs to be done, they should advise, first of all, whoever their account person is, that needs to be disclosed. And they're probably going to tell them to pound sand. But their avid has to be a little bit more aggressive than maybe yours would be as a normal agent, because those things do need to be disclosed. But in the case of a probate or a trustee selling a property or trust, that person who's the administrator of the probate, or the person that is the successor trustee of the trust, if they have knowledge of anything that is a material fact or defect that may be an issue, they are required to disclose it, even though they don't have to provide a TDS or an SPQ. There is a form called the ESD, exempt seller's disclosure, and these trusts, REOs, and probates are required to provide that ESD. They're also required to provide some of these other mandated disclosures, or all of these mandated disclosures. They're required to provide those because the state requires that. It's not a real estate thing, it's a state of California thing. So keep in mind, when you are the listing agent for a probate or for a trust, that you still make it clear to that person who is your contact, whether it be the administrator or executor of a probate, or it's a successor trustee on the trust, that anything they know that could be a material fact of the property, anything that could cause a change in the desirability of the property, you still need to disclose. It's required. Okay. So next up, hazard zones, which is the NHD report. Basically, seller is not exempt from applicable statutory obligation to disclose earthquake, fault zone, seismic hazard zone, state for fire responsibility areas, all the stuff that is in the NHD report. So even a probate, REO, or trust are not exempt from providing an NHD report. The smoke detectors, they're not exempt from the requirement of having smoke detectors installed. Same with the water heaters, same with the lead-based paint disclosure form. So an FLD is still required on all three of those trusts, probates, or REOs. Carbon monoxide detectors are supposed to, the carbon monoxide, they're not exempt from that. The water conserving plumbing fixtures, if there is a requirement that has those in there, they're not exempt from that. The tax withholding, they're not exempt from providing you the FERPTA, right? So in a transaction, the seller fills out a form called the seller affidavit. Okay. As a matter of fact, since we're going to talk about that right now, let's just bring it up right now. So we can talk about that. Oh, it's not in the transaction yet. So let's try adding it this way. Let's go. Seller affidavit. Where is it? Yes, let's do it that way. Wow. There it is. Okay, so we're going to add that. And then we're going to add this form, the qualified substitute. Okay, so they're not exempt from the tax withholding and reporting the FERPTA information. And so every seller has to fill out this form, the seller's affidavit of non-foreign status. So basically what it's saying is that I'm not a foreign national, I'm a U.S. citizen, and I promise you I'm going to pay my taxes if there are any taxes that are part of the sale of this property, or whether I'm exempt, right? They have to fill that out. Now, it used to be, as a seller, I had to give this form to the buyer. And on this form, it had my name, my signature, and my social security number. I had to put it in. Okay. So people were hesitant to add their social security number here to the form. So what happens is that this form basically is saying, yes, I'm going to pay the taxes. Okay. I'm going to take care of any tax liability I may have based on the sale of this. If I, as buyer, don't have this fully executed FERPTA, this seller's affidavit, and the IRS or FTB comes knocking because there are unpaid taxes associated with that address, if I don't have the information for the seller, there is a possibility that I, as buyer, could be responsible for those tax liabilities. Okay. So because sellers were hesitant to give buyers their social security number, and nobody can argue with anybody being hesitant about that, they were giving this form, the FERPTA form, not fully executed. It was missing the social security number. So all these buyers had FERPTAs that were incomplete, and if there was an issue, they weren't going to be protected. So what CAR did is, because they knew people were not going to be delivering this form as they should, is they created this form called the qualified substitute. Okay. And so what this does is it allows escrow to get the fully executed FERPTA, and they'll do it in their escrow instructions if they don't have one from zip forms from CAR, and they'll get all the information. It'll be the seller's name, their social security number, and them saying that, yes, we agree that we'll take care of any unpaid taxes, and there should be none, right? We're exempt. And then escrow will fill this out and sign it and give it to the buyer. And now the buyer has this. So if there is ever a question on any unpaid tax liability, the buyer can give this over that says, hey, escrow told me they have it. And because of it, escrow would be compelled to give that information over to the IRS or FTB about those unpaid taxes, and it would protect your buyer. So I'm just showing that because that withholding taxes came up, and I think sometimes people think that FERPTA and stuff is not required when those entities are selling, and that's not true if they are. So I just wanted to show those to you while we were talking about it. Okay. So these are all the things that are required. The Megan's Law database disclosure, the notice regarding gas and hazardous liquids transmission lines. Those are all the mandated disclosures that they're required to give. They're required no matter what. Doesn't matter if it's an REO, a trust, or a probate. The things that they may be exempt from. See, it says maybe. Seller does not have to complete, sign, and provide buyer with a real estate transfer disclosure statement or a natural hazard disclosure statement. Remember, the natural hazard disclosure statement is different than the natural hazard disclosure report that we order from a third-party company. So the natural hazard disclosure statement is a couple-page form that's in zip forms that the seller answers the questions themselves. Do you know if this is in a fault zone or an earthquake zone or fire zone? And they sign that. We use the NHD report from a third-party company to alleviate the responsibility of our seller from filling that out because they don't know. And the same thing in this case. And so these people, the REOs, trust, probates, they do the NHD report for the same reason, but they don't have to provide the statement. Even though they don't have to do that, it says seller remains obligated to make the disclosures and comply with the items specified in paragraph 1. So even though they have to do that, they still have to disclose based on what's in paragraph 1 that we went over with the things that they are required for. Bertha, you had your hand up. Go ahead. Oh, you disappeared. Where'd you go? Go ahead, Bertha.
So as long as my seller provides this report, I don't have to add the form, right? The natural hazard disclosure statement.
Yeah, well, nobody does the natural hazard disclosure statement because we do the natural hazard disclosure reports that we hire from the third-party company. Nobody ever does that NHD statement. And you're not required to, because that report that we pay for is a substitute for that disclosure statement. So it takes that liability off the seller's shoulders, okay? Seller is exempt from providing buyer with a Melrose District lien disclosure, an Improvement Bond Act notice, a supplementary tax notice, a notice of private transfer fee pursuant to Code 1102, and either a homeowner's or commercial property owner's guide to earthquake safety. So they don't have to give those. So the earthquake booklets that we give, they're not required to deliver those. Exempt sellers disclosure. Even exempt sellers have statutory contractual obligations to make certain disclosures and may be required by contract to use the exempt seller disclosure and is strongly encouraged to do so. So that's when we talked about the ESD. If you guys want to see, we can see the difference between the ESD and the SPQ. They are similar. They are just shorter. So we can add the ESD just so you guys can take a look at it. And the exempt seller's disclosure is 1 page, you see, and it is those yes or no. Are you seller aware of within the last 3 years death of an occupant? Yes or no. And any yeses need to be explained in this section below. So it's just a much shorter disclosure, but it is things that that may or may not know about the property as an entity seller. Okay. All right. So that's that. Let's see. Let's go back over here. And which one didn't we look at? We didn't. Oh, the wire fraud. No, the wildfire disaster. Let's look at that one. So this advisory is about wildfires. Just again, advisory talks about the extra cost. There's nothing to fill out on this. It does talk about the fire hardening defensible space part of the report, what'll happen. If you're in an area that you believe may show up on a high fire zone, then I would put this in. Again, that's what goes back to being a listing agent, is ordering reports and things early. If I get my NEG report before I start marketing and knowing that I'm going to know ahead of time that it's in a high fire area, then I can incorporate this stuff into my counters, get the fire hardening disclosure filled out and work on it instead of us getting caught off guard because we order our NHD after we get an offer accepted. And we find out in escrow that it's in a fire zone, right? If it's in a high or very high fire area, and then we have to deal with that fire hardening disclosure. But if I do it early, I could get all of that stuff done prior to marketing the property. So I run into less issues doing it that way. All right, let's see. I think we got through all of that. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. We are definitely going to finish next week because we're going to go through just kind of the explanation paragraphs quickly because there's not a lot else to fill out. So I'm pretty sure we're going to finish. Bertha, you had another question?
Thank you, Kyle. Going back to the exchange, I learned there's some exchange companies that they do provide booklets in English and Spanish. And when I do have a client, I just deliver one of those booklets. They're free. And also they do provide a free one-time consultation for the client. So that way, you know, I don't put so much liability on my shoulders. It's just as an information. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, nice to know. And again, we, I have a 1031. You guys have all met him too. Phil Atwan, who's my go-to as an accommodator. So he's quick to answer questions and give advice and do those things. So if you guys ever need his information, let me know and I'll get it to you. Or, you know, his emails, his phone, any of that stuff. But I've known him since I've been in the business. So I trust him implicitly with those exchange questions like that. All right, so let's stop the share there. Any other questions before I let you guys go? No? All right. Well, like I said, I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that we're going to finish this next week and be finished going through the whole contract. I really appreciate that you guys come and listen to me talk about this stuff. If you missed any part of it, if you came in late, and you want to review, remember it will be on YouTube later today. Don't forget to share and like the stuff. It helps me out to get more views too on my YouTube channel, so we get more people educated out there. So I appreciate any help you guys can do in that arena also. So take care of yourselves, be productive, and I'll talk to you again soon.